Hello there, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today, Get Your Payroll Done. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and I am joined for the very last time today by my colleague Calvin, who will be standing by in the background, ready to answer any questions. Let's take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar today. So it's a webinar of 3 parts. We're going to start with preparing to process a pay run. So I'm going to take you through a preparation checklist, including how to deal with new starters. We're then going to move on and process a payroll. So I'll take you through a typical pay run, focusing on 5 key tasks, but also explaining some of the other things that happen in and around those tasks. And then the third section is your month-end tasks. So this is all involving working out your payment HMRC, and then in some cases doing a month-end submission. And then at the end, we usually have around 5 minutes remaining to continue answering your questions in the Q&A. So let's get straight on to the first part of the webinar, Prepare to Process. And we'll start with a quick look at our preparation checklist. So 4 things to do before you even sit down to enter the employee's pay. The first one is to add any new starters that have joined your business since the last payroll that you ran. Second step is to enter absences that qualify for a statutory payment. So we're talking sickness, maternity, and paternity being the main 3. The third step would be to put employees not being paid on hold. So these could be casual employees that haven't worked, employees currently on unpaid leave, and it just excludes them from the pay run. And then the fourth step is to check for any tax code or student loan notices, which you can do electronically if you receive them online via the IR Secure mailbox in Sage 50 Payroll. So we're going to take a quick look at these steps in our first demo. So what I will do is I'll just bring the slides down. And for this demo, I'm going to be dealing with monthly paid employees. And the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to set up a new employee record for an employee that has joined us since the last payroll that we ran. So whenever you take on a new starter, they should have some paperwork with them. And that would usually either be a P45 from their previous employer, or if they don't have a P45, you would get them to fill in what's now known as a starter checklist, but was previously known as a P46. And between a combination of those 2 documents, you should have all the information that's required to set up an employee record. Now, I wanted to show you the starter checklist because it is quite a useful document and it's available to download on the gov.uk website. So we have linked to this in the handout, but the starter checklist can be filled in by the employee online. So they can start and run through a process, or perhaps a bit more conveniently, you can download a PDF of the form and you can get them to physically fill it in. So it's a good way of capturing your employees' full personal details, prompting to ask for their national insurance number, date of birth, and then they would select an employee statement that fits their circumstances. So they would work through this checklist. That will then determine which statement applies to them, and that in turn would affect which tax code that you put them on. Now, as well as the starter statement, the starter checklist also has information about student loans, which you won't be able to get from a P45. So for those that are repaying a student loan, it asks them what type of plan they're on, and it explains the different plan types so they can indicate which plan applies to them. And then declaration at the bottom for them to sign and then give you that form back. So even if you have got a P45 from their previous employer, I would suggest that you get them to fill one of these in anyway, so you've got the full information that you would need when you come to set them up. So back into payroll, let's assume we've got our starter forms from the employee. What we now need to do is to create their record. So I'm going to share the first of what's hopefully many tips in today's webinar, and that is when you come to create a new employee record, if you first select an existing employee, you can use the existing record as a template and apply much the same settings. So put them in the same department, using the same pay elements, same pay frequency, that sort of thing. So in this example, I'm going to select employee 3, who happens to be leaving. And we're going to process their leaving details later on in the demo. And we're taking on a new employee as a direct replacement for them. So I'm going to use their record as the template. Now, to create an employee, you would go to the employee tasks and you would either click Employee Wizard, which will take you through a step-by-step wizard, entering information one step at a time. And there is an option here to create an employee record based on an existing employee, if you want to copy some of the existing settings. Or you can use the quick employee option. So it's all down to personal preference. And with this one, if you've selected someone, again, it asks you if you want to copy over information. So if I say yes to that, I've then got a form that I can fill in with the new employee's details. So anything with a star next to it is mandatory. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter the main details for this particular employee. So I put a couple of address lines in, postcode. If you provide an email address and you're using online services, so HR online services for your payslips, that email address will become the employee's login. We do have a separate section, a separate webinar actually on getting started with Sage HR. I'll just pop in the other mandatory details. So employee's start date. We can record bank details. And that can be used with Sage e-banking or salary payments. And then in this section, we're going to provide the details of the form. So if it's a P45, you would enter details such as total pay and tax to date and the tax code at leaving date from that form. But you still need to select a starting declaration, which you can get from a starter checklist. Or if they don't have a P45, which in this case they don't, choose P46, choose the starting declaration from that form, and then the appropriate tax code will then be assigned. So it's 1257L on a week one, month one basis in this particular example. So we'll just go ahead and enter the national insurance number, and I'm choosing the standard NI category for this employee. They haven't indicated that they're repaying any student or postgraduate loans. And at this stage, I'm not going to assign a pension scheme because I'm going to assess the employee, make sure they need to be auto-enrolled, and then we can assign a pension when we come to do their first payment. So we're going to pay them a gross salary, which I'm going to enter as an annual amount. And then payroll is going to work out the equivalent amount for the month. And we've already got an overtime payment assigned. And that's been based off that existing record. So we've got enough information here. We've filled in all the mandatory fields to save the new record. If I wanted to add further employees with the same settings, I can retain some of the details. Or if you want to start afresh with a new employee, you can click Save and Clear, which I will do. It's just a message that comes up to tell me I need to enter some contracted hours, which we're going to do in a moment. And then I can close out of this form and you'll see that my new employee has now been created. So just going into this employee, we can add any additional information should we need to. I'm just going to jump into the salary details and enter the employee's contracted hours. So they're working 35 hours per week. And for this particular employee, it just means that their overtime rate can now be calculated from their salary. So that's known as a factored payment. It's quite a good way of managing things that are linked to a base payment. So that's our new starter created. The next step in the checklist was to enter any statutory absences. So by doing this, the relevant statutory payment will be automatically calculated when you come to run your payroll. And I just want to point out some options which make it easy to set up these payments for the first time. So if I select one of my employees, this employee will be starting maternity leave this month. You'll find from the employee tasks, if you've got someone selected, you do have these quick links to record sickness, adoption, maternity, or paternity. So I'll record the maternity details by saying I've received the employee's form. by entering the baby's due date and recording the employee's last day of work. So they're working up to Friday the 13th. If known, we can enter the actual date of birth and return to work date at this stage, or we can come back and add that information later. And you can see here the system has enough information to establish that the employee qualifies for the payment. It lists all the key dates and it shows the statutory entitlement for the 39 weeks of SMP that the employee is entitled to. So we can save those details, we can print a summary as well. And then when we close out, that's recorded the absence details, and the statutory maternity pay in this case will be shown when we come to process the payroll. A couple of other steps just to run through in our checklist. So the third one was to put employees not being paid on hold. So this is only required if you've got staff that maybe don't work all of the time. They're not due a payment, so you're not going to be paying them. And it's a way of excluding them from the pay run, but also submitting their details to HMRC in your next FPS to indicate that they're irregularly paid. And that's something you can do the first time you put someone on hold when they start a period of kind of unpaid leave. So to find that status, simply open the employee record, go onto the employment tab, and you can switch the status from OK to on hold, and then you can save that change. So this employee isn't going to be paid in October, so we're going to exclude him from the pay run. One last step then, and this is to check for any tax code or student loan notices. Some of you will probably still get these in the post, in which case if you've received a notice, you would go into the relevant employee record to enter the detail of the tax code change or the date that a student loan starts or stops. But if you receive them online, you'll actually be able to check for any new notices directly in Sage Payroll and apply changes to the relevant employee. So I'll quickly show you where you can do that. If you go to your e-submissions tasks, there's the option for IR Secure Mailbox. So we're going to go into that and we're going to check for new mail by clicking the new mail button. And that will then connect to your PAYE online account. And if there are any new notifications, they'll be displayed in this section on the left-hand side. So no new notices for me, so no changes that I need to make. So I can simply close out of this screen and I'm ready to get on with my payroll. So that is preparing to process. And just to recap those steps, we started by adding a new starter. We used their starter form to fill in all the details. We've entered some absence that qualifies for a statutory payment. If you have employees not being paid, you should place them on hold. And we checked our secure mailbox. Nothing new this week, but a good habit to get into to make sure you're on top of the latest changes from HMRC. And if you want to download a copy of the starter checklist yourself, there's a link to that available there on the slide. So on to the next part of the webinar, and this is where we're going to get the payroll done. We're going to process a typical pay run, and I'm going to focus on 5 key tasks. So first thing we're going to do is set our process date, which will determine the tax period and the pay date reported in our submissions. We can then move on and enter the payment details for the current period. We would then produce pay slips and pre-update reports, for example, payment summaries. You would update the records, which will confirm the current pay values. And then the last step is to submit that information to HMRC. So in its simplest form, that's your payroll process. But as I go through the demo, I'm going to mention some of the things that you might do in and around these steps. So starting with the process date, you are prompted to set this when you first log in to Sage 50 Payroll, but it can be changed from the change process date option. And in this step, you would need to enter the date the employees receive their pay, with the only exception being if the regular pay date happens to fall on a non-banking day, and you might be paying the employee earlier and later or later than normal, you would still report your pay date as the regular pay date in that scenario. So let's have a look at this in the demo. So I'm going to switch to my payroll tasks now. So clicking this payroll option in the bottom left-hand corner. So we can either work through the tasks from top to bottom from the section here on the left-hand side, or you might find it easier to follow a process. So in the top right-hand corner, you've got the change view option, and from here you can switch on the payroll process. And that window can be resized to your liking. So you'll see the first task, and the first step in the process is to change the process date. So when I've gone in, I've just set it as today's date, but actually the employees are paid on the last day of the month. So I need to change the process date and select my pay date, in this case the 31st of October, but then display the relevant tax period. It's tax month 7 in this example, and I can click OK to save that date. And that is also displayed in the bottom right-hand corner if you ever need a reminder of what your current process date is. So first step's done. What we now need to do is to select the employees that we want to pay. Now, if you have more than one pay frequency, so maybe you've got a monthly payroll and a weekly payroll, in order to select the specific pay frequency, you can use the outline option here at the top. And that allows you to filter your employee list by pay period, maybe also by department. So it makes it quick to switch between monthly and weekly paid employees if you happen to have both of those pay frequencies. But in this demo, we've kept things simple. All the employees are paid monthly, so I can select the All Employees folder. What you can then do is you can either click on each employee individually, or for a quick way to select everyone in the list, you can click Clear and then Swap. And you'll see that we've now got everyone highlighted as these are the employees we want to pay. Obviously, I put someone on hold earlier, and you can see the current status reads on hold for them. And you'll find when we go to enter the payments, we will be prompted to deselect that employee. So don't worry if you've got leavers in the list as well. They will also be deselected when you go into enter the payments. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to enter the pay values for the current period. Now, if you're running a variable payroll, where the number of hours worked changes, maybe you've got payments where the amount changes each period, maybe commissions or bonuses, you may want to run the reset payments wizard first. So this allows you to selectively choose which values you want to reset either to default values or clear to 0. So it's here in the list of tasks and also in your process map. And what you can do is you can run through the reset payments wizard, always choose selectively reset. And then for each payment type, you can decide whether you want to set back to defaults, retain the previously processed amounts, or the other option is to clear. So I could clear the bonus rates. If I wanted to start from 0, I might choose to clear the overtime hours. So you can work your way through this wizard, and depending on what you've selected here, when you click finish, those values will revert back to defaults or be cleared to 0. I'm not going to bother running it though, because most of my employees get paid the same each period. So I'm just going to jump ahead and go straight into the enter payment screen. Now you'll see a prompt asking if you want to check for updates to the current legislation. There aren't any updates, but it does no harm to check. And then because we do have someone marked on hold, it is prompting us to deselect them. So at this stage, I would click yes, and that will take us into the payment screen for the first employee in the list. So hopefully most of you are familiar with this, but it separates the different pay elements into tabs at the top. So I've got payments, deductions, attachment of earnings and loans. You've got a section to quickly record sickness absence or shared parental leave absence. So if you're dealing with an employee who's been off sick for a while, and you want to extend their sickness, you can do that from the enter payment screen. And then you do have a summary of payments and deductions. This is a good place to check things like pension contributions or student and postgraduate loans. There's information on the values used in calculations, and there's also a notes section. So if you want to keep notes for a particular employee, these are stored in the history tab of their record. So I'll put a quick note in there as a test. So the idea here is you look through the payments, make any changes as necessary. So I've got a basic salary entered. Maybe the employee has worked some overtime, so 10 hours, and the rate has been worked out for us. It's at time and a half. And then they might have a bonus payment this month. So I put £300 bonus. And you can see it builds up the gross pay at the bottom. It shows the tax and the NI deduction. It also shows the employee's net pay. So once you're happy with the payments, you would click onto Save/Next, and you would rinse and repeat for the next employees. Now I'm going to move straight on to employee 3. You might remember that this employee was the one I selected when I took on the new starter. So this employee's leaving this month and they're not working the full month. So I will need to make a manual adjustment to this month's salary. So currently we've got the employee's full salary entered, but I know that this month they're only going to be working for 15 days up to their leaving date. And that's out of a total of 22 working days based on the employee's working pattern. So they normally work 5 days a week. I've checked my calendar, it's 22 working days in October, and I want to pay them for 15 of them. So this is how I'm going to do the adjustment, and there are other ways you could do this. I'm going to adjust the hours value, so 15 divided by 22, which will then reduce the amount. And then I would need to enter any other payments that might be due and try to include all payments that are due in the final pay to avoid having to do a payment after leaving, which would follow a slightly different process. So we put the final salary in, there's no overtime due or anything like that. If you tick the box at the bottom for any leavers to say that they're leaving, it's their final payment, Payroll will do a few checks in the background and it will notify you about any other outstanding items or alerts that you might need to see. So it does say for this one that there is an outstanding attachment order. So we need to get in contact with the court or creditor to let them know that the employee is moving on. So then some advice on the next steps for a leaver. You would need to update records and process leaver details before you submit to HMRC. Then we can move on to our next employee. So the next one is starting a period of maternity leave for this month. And because we've already entered the absence details, if I click the summary tab, you'll see that there is some statutory maternity pay due. So that's been calculated automatically, and I'll need to make an adjustment to the employee's usual basic pay. So it depends on the contract you have with the employee and whether or not they're entitled to any company maternity pay in this case. So if you want to give them their full basic, for example, you can use the make up basic option. So if I just wanted them to receive their usual salary amount, we'd put the full salary in. We go to the summary tab and click make up basic. And that will then prompt us to make an adjustment to the salary amount, leaving the employee with their usual pay. And I could do that for each period where there's a specific amount I want them to receive in total. If you don't have a company scheme, a little bit like the new starter or a leaver, you would work out what you want to pay them for the days or hours that they worked. You would type that in manually, and then the statutory maternity pay will take care of itself. So that's an employee on a statutory payment. Let's just go ahead and save the default values for the other employees. So most of them are getting fixed salary. Some of them are paid hourly, so I might need to adjust the hours worked based on timesheets they might have submitted. And as we get to our last employee, this was a new starter. And again, they've not worked the full month. They started on the 9th of October. So I'm going to do a similar adjustment to what I did with the leaver. I'm going to pay them for 17 out of 22 working days. And that has adjusted their salary for this period. So you might have other ways of adjusting pay. for employees that don't work the full period. So follow your own process when it comes to that. That was just an example of doing a manual adjustment. Now, because this is a new employee, we need to establish whether they need to go into the pension scheme. And if you use our pensions module, one of your next steps will be to run a pension assessment. And that will take care of assigning any pension schemes, creating pension letters, and helping you send the enrolment information to your provider. Now, if you don't have our pensions module, you'll need to do a manual assessment. So look at the employee's earnings and age. And then if they need to be put into a pension scheme, you'll need to assign it manually. So I'm going to assign a pension scheme to this employee manually. And just another tip for you, if you're in the middle of a pay run and you want to do something in the employee record, you don't have to close out of the pay run and start again. You can just click this employee button at the top. I can then go on to the pensions tab in this case. I'm just going to add the company pension to them. Set the join scheme as their start date. Then I can review their contributions. So I've popped them into the pension scheme. We now have pension deducted for them. And this is what they're going to get as their first pay packet from us this month. So that's the payments entered. If I just close out of that screen, you'll see that the last calculated column has now been populated with our October pay date. So payments have been entered, and our next step will be to check these payments by running a set of pre-update reports. Now, just before we go into that, I'll quickly mention an alternative way of entering hours worked for hourly paid employees. So this might be useful if you have employees that get overtime, you've got timesheets that you're working through, or you've got employees paid hourly. So I've got a few of them. There is a timesheet entry option, which is used specifically for entering the hours worked. When you go into that, and I'll just maximize this, you'll see it shows you the relevant pay elements. So if I was just entering overtime values, I could go into timesheet entry, I could enter the number of hours worked against each employee, and I could save any changes. So just a different way that you could enter the hours worked for hourly paid employees. So let's recap where we're up to now. We set our process date to the date the employees are paid. We've been into enter the payments. So we could reset the payments first. Timesheet entry is another way to enter hours worked. And running a pension assessment would be your next step if you use our pensions module. And a quick reminder of that enter payment screen. You'd enter your hours and rate values in the main screen. You can switch between the different tabs for deductions, attachments, loans, etc. You've got that gross to net breakdown at the bottom, just a high level summary, and you click Save/Next to move on to your next employee. And the top tip here, if you're in the middle of a pay run, you need to get into an employee record, hit that employee button. That'll take you into the record so you can make any changes without interrupting your flow. So we're at the halfway point of the webinar and also of our pay run, and it's now time to create pay slips and reports for our payroll information. So let's talk pay slips first. It is a legal requirement to provide a pay slip to your employee on or before their pay date. And with Sage 50, you've got three options or three formats that you can produce the pay slips. So you can either upload them to HR online services, so employees can view them in an online portal or from a mobile app. You can send pay slips as attachments to emails from Microsoft Outlook or via webmail, and they can be password protected with a password entered in the employee record, or you can be traditional and print the pay slips either onto plain paper or onto payslip stationery, which is no longer available from Sage, but is still available from third-party sellers. So you can read more about each of those methods by following the links there on the handout, but we're going to quickly show you the print option and online pay slips. So if I just bring this slide down, next step in the payroll tasks is the pre-update reports, which is also here in the process map. So let's go into that first. There are various report categories on the left-hand side, starting with your favorites. So I've got 3 reports in my favorites. There's a payslip that can be printed, and there are a couple of payment summary reports, which will be useful for your own payroll records. So to find the payslips and the different layouts available, just look under the payslips folder. Most of you will have laser printers or inkjet printers, so you choose the laser section here, and then you'll see all the standard payslip layouts. So if you do have stationery, have a look through the description and find the one that closely matches the stationery you've bought. If you're printing onto plain paper, it's the case of generating the report. So I've also set up some of my employees to receive online payslips, but for this demo, I'm going to include them in the printed version. And you'll see payslip information on screen. So the payments, deductions, and year-to-date values, and the employee's take-home pay or their net pay here in the bottom corner. So you might want a copy of this just for your own records. So you could export it and save it as a PDF. You could print it directly onto your payslip stationery if you have any. But if you are printing onto plain paper, just be aware that it will only print the words and the numbers. It won't print that green background, as that's designed to illustrate what the payslip stationery would look like. But if you do want to print it onto plain paper so it looks exactly like this, what I'd suggest you do is export it first. So I'm just going to save this onto my desktop. I'm going to call it October Payslips and save that as a PDF. And then what we have is we have this version which we can then print out onto plain paper, and that will then print in full color. Or we could just keep the PDF for our own records. Other pre-update reports that I mentioned are the payment summaries, which you'll find in the summary folder. Part 1 gives a breakdown gross to net with all of the employee deductions. So total gross, student loans, PAYE, national insurance and pension. Also calls out any statutory payments, and it gives you the net pay, so total net pay for this pay run. Then you've got part 2, which gives a bit more detail on the employer side. So employer NI, employer pension, as well as a record of the tax code and NI categories that have been used. So if you're going to print any reports for yourself, I would suggest these 2 as a minimum, and you find them here in the summary folder, payment summary part 1 and part 2. Another thing you can do, and I'm just going to quickly show you this because we do have a separate session on report selections, is you can create a batch of reports that all run at the same time. So I've got a selection of pre-update reports that I've put together here. And if I preview this report selection, it's going to show a number of reports all split into tabs. So copy the payslips, payment summary 1 and 2, and also a pensions report that I've decided to include. And the good thing about this is when you export it, there is an option, if you click on this drop-down arrow, to export it as a single document. So I've then got one file with all of my October payroll details that I can easily refer back to without having to go into the program and start running historical reports. So that is known as a report selection. We've got a link in the handout that tells you a bit more about setting those up. So those are some payslips that you could print or save as a PDF and some pre-update reports. Let me also show you online payslips. So you get this included in your payroll subscription. You can set it up from the online services settings. If you've set it up, you can then upload payslips in just a few clicks. So if I click on to upload online payslips, you'll see that I've got 5 employees that I've set up for this option. We can schedule them in the future. So maybe I want these available to employees on Friday the 27th, just before their pay date. Then we can publish them to an online portal. So like I say, we have a separate webinar on getting started with HR online services. But there's a link there to log into the portal, which looks something like this. You can then view a list of payslips that you've published. So we've got these ones pending towards the end of this month. And what the employee would see, if we just look at an employee profile, is they would see their own payslips and P60s, looking something like this. These are the ones that have been published. And they can then view the details on screen like so. So a great way to provide payslips and P60s to your employees. They can even access this from a mobile app. So those are our reports. Let's just jump back to the slides a moment while we summarize what we did there. So we did some printed payslips, some online payslips, got some recommended reports. And if you follow this link on the slide, report selections, that tells you more about creating that reports pack. That moves us on to our next step, and this is to update the records. So what this does is it confirms the current pay values, adds them to the employee history, so it becomes historical information. And then if required, you can post your payroll information to accounts using the nominal link, and you can deal with any levers. So let's rejoin the demo and complete those next steps. So we've reviewed the payslips and reports. We're happy with the information, so we don't need to go back and change anything. What I'm now going to do is update the records, just here in the payroll tasks. There's a reminder that you need to print your pre-update reports first, which I've already done, so I'm going to click yes to continue. And then that takes us into the update records wizard. So at this stage, we'd strongly recommend that you take a manual backup of your data, which could be used to recover your data to this point in the future if you needed to. So click onto backup and follow the backup wizard. That then continues into the update records wizard. So we have 10 monthly employees to be updated. These are the employee names. When I click finish, it then confirms that those employees have now been updated. So if you're not sure if you've updated records yet, a good way of checking is looking down the last updated column, and that now displays my October pay date for all employees that were paid on that date. My next step is to deal with my lever. So looking at the process map, you'll see there is an option to process levers at this point, or you can do it from your employee tasks. So I have one employee leaving. So let's start by selecting that employee. If I then go to the employee tasks and click lever, that takes you into the lever wizard. What you then need to do is to record the leaving date, which was the 20th of October for this employee. And then from this drop-down list, just choose the P45 on plain paper. And you can then print a P45 for your employees' records. So they'll take that on to their new employer. So they've got part 1A that they keep, part 2 and 3 for the new employer. And that provides the new employer with all the information needed to create that new employee record. So I could print that from here. I can then complete the lever wizard. And you'll see that the current status for this employee now reads lever. So we'll just continue with the pay run and complete the process. So if I switch my process map back on, you'll see that my next step is the full payment submission. So this is when you're reporting your payroll to HMRC. gives details of their pay and deductions for the current period, and your deadline for a full payment submission is the employee's pay date. So it needs to be submitted on or before the date the employees are paid. So let's go into full payment submission now. Because we placed someone on hold this period, it is asking if we want to include them in the FPS. So first period they're put on hold, they should be included in the FPS, and that informs HMRC that they're being paid irregularly at this point, but they're still employed by you. So we've ticked to include them. You can ignore the warning. This is just because I'm in the training environment. And then you'll get your submission screen. So when you click continue, it'll show your saved user ID and password and company details. You then click submit, and you'll see a summary of the information to be sent. So it's for tax month 7. We've got some leaving details. We've got some starter details. We have an irregularly paid employee who's just been put on hold, and we've got the liability values in respect of each employee and the total liability for this pay run. So you can print that summary if you want, and then you click submit to send it to HMRC. So once the progress bar is moved across, you'll see this confirmation screen, the submission has been successful. And then looking at your employee list, your last FPS date will now display the latest pay date, which in this case was the 31st of October. So that has now been submitted to HMRC. If you ever need to look back on the figures that were included in that submission, just go to your e-submission section and into the FPS viewer. All of these files relate to a previous submission. The latest submission will always be at the bottom. And then you'll be able to view this information, send it to Excel, export the XML if required, and you get visibility of exactly what was submitted to HMRC. So that's that liability figure that we saw in the summary earlier. So that's our payroll done. Just to recap those last few steps, we updated the records. We then ran the lever wizard. So it's important you do the lever wizard before the FPS in order to include the leaving details without delay. Printed the P45 and then we submitted to HMRC. And that's included starter and lever details, taxable payments, tax NI and student loan contributions making up the liability. And that needs to be sent on or before the employee's pay date. So that now brings us on to the third and final part of the webinar, all around your month-end tasks. So only a couple of these to do in Sage Payroll. Number one is to run a P32 report. So this tells you how much you need to pay to HMRC. And then step 2, if required, that's why it's got a star next to it, is to submit your employer payment summary or EPS to HMRC. Now, most of the information that HMRC need is included in the FPS, so all of the tax and national insurance and the student loans. But the EPS is required if you've recovered a statutory payment, if you're recovering CIS deductions suffered, or if you have apprenticeship levy payments due to HMRC. So if none of that applies to you, you will not need to do that second step. Third one is to make your payment to HMRC. So the payment deadline is the 19th of the following month if you pay by check, 22nd of the month if you pay electronically. Now, we've used the term month end, but we are of course talking about tax months. So as a reminder, the tax calendar always begins on the 6th day of the month, as the tax year starts on the 6th of April. So a tax month will run between the 6th of the month and the 5th of the following month. So before you complete any month-end tasks, you must ensure that you've completed payroll for all pay dates that fall within the tax month. So if you pay monthly, it's dead simple. Just do your monthly pay run. You can then move on to month end. But if you pay weekly or fortnightly or even 4 weekly, do have a check at your next pay date And if it falls on or before the 5th of the next calendar month, you'll need to have completed that before you do your month end. And if you want to download the tax calendar, they are available from our Help Centre. So this is your P32 report. It itemises the figures that make up your liability. So at the top of the report there, you've got tax, student loans, and national insurance contributions, all reported in the FPS. It also shows adjustments to your payment, so reductions for employment allowance that you might be claiming, statutory payments you've recovered, and if applicable, apprenticeship levy payments that are due. They need to be reported in an EPS, and then the end result is you get the amount payable to HMRC. So let's take a quick look at the P32 report. So just to confirm that I've completed my pay run for this month, I can check last updated and last FPS, both of which are displaying 31st of October. To run the P32 report, you could look through these payroll links, and there is a quick link directly to that report. That's pretty handy. Or you can go to the main reports option, go to period end, and it's this one here, which I'll just add to my favorites by clicking the star, Form P32 Employer Payment Record. So we'll generate the report, and we're running it for month 7. And you will see, if I just zoom in slightly, we've got the total tax, total national insurance. I've already claimed my employment allowance for this year, but I am recovering a statutory payment. So the amount that's due is less than what we submitted in the FPS, because the FPS only included these values. So because there is an adjustment to report, we will need to submit an employer payment summary, and we would do that at the end of the tax month. So that's what I need to pay. I'll need to do an EPS. So just to show you where that is, it's the e-submissions tasks. You've got employer payment summary. You need to run through a quick wizard. So in this case, we're adjusting the payment because we've recovered statutory pay. It displays the tax month. It displays the amounts recovered to date. So this is a year-to-date submission. So you'd expect this to accumulate as the maternity leave goes on. CIS deductions suffered, if they apply to you, can be entered here. And then apprenticeship levy payments, bigger payrolls, it would show any amount due on this step. So I'm happy with that. I can go ahead and submit it. And then that can be used for HMRC to calculate the correct amount payable. And you can view that information if you need to in the future by going into your e-submissions log, finding the EPS submission here, then drilling into the details. So that's what was included in that particular submission. So that's our P32. We can arrange our payment to HMRC. A recap of the reasons when an EPS would be required. So recovering statutory pay is the main one. Suffered CIS deductions, reporting apprenticeship levy, or if no one has worked in the tax month, and you need to inform HMRC that no payment is due. So that's the other reason to send an EPS. And as long as you've made your payment to HMRC, that's month end complete. And that also brings us to the end of the webinar. So before we go, we're going to give you the chance to submit any final questions, and I'd like to run you through some further support, some great resources available to you. So first one to mention is our online help centre. So in your browser, you can get there at sage.co.uk/help, and then follow the link for Sage 50 Payroll. Or if you're already in Payroll, you can click any of the help options that you'll find throughout the system, and that will take you to an in-product version of the Help Centre, which you'll find alongside your software. So from here, you can read all our support guides. You can check out other webinars that are upcoming. There's a webinar option at the top of the Help Centre there. You'll also be able to get in touch with our support team. So you'll find all the contact details available there as well. Sage University is another great online resource, sageu.com. It's completely free to use and to complete our payroll training and certifications. So you just need to create a profile at sageu.com, and then you can dive into the e-learning, certification and bite-sized learning on offer. So if you're new to Sage, maybe new to payroll, it's a great way to get up to speed. So that's about it for the presentation. We are going to stick around. So if you have any further questions, submit them in the Q&A. If you'd like to download the handouts, now's the last chance to do that. So you can do so from the handouts icon. If you are leaving now, thanks so much for joining us today. Look out for a follow-up email, which will contain a link to the recording of today's session. And if you see a survey appear as you leave the webinar, really would appreciate any feedback that you might have if you could take a moment to complete that survey. We do read all responses and we use it to improve these sessions moving forward. So I am about to go on mute as we help tie up those final questions, and I will be back to say goodbye as we close the session. So I shall speak to you shortly. Hello again, and thank you so much for sending those questions through. We're just getting the very last answers out to you. As we are nearly out of time, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you once again for joining us at the webinar today. It's been a pleasure. If you could take a moment to complete the short exit survey as you leave, that would be very much appreciated. Please do look out for your follow-up email arriving later today. You can find links to register for future webinars at sage.co.uk/webinars. There's also a handy link to watch some of our recent recordings. So all that remains then is to thank you all once again for joining us. Thank you to Calvin for answering the questions today on your very last webinar. And we hope to see some of you at some of our other webinars very soon in the future. So goodbye for now.